Welcome. You're watching The Big Question. I'm Tamanna Inamdar. Hugs, handshakes and hard bargains. This is what marked the first high-level visit from the White House under Trump 2.0 as US Vice President J.D. Vance met Prime Minister Narendra Modi in a high-stakes meeting. At the heart of this four-day India visit was the Vance-Modi bilateral, the core of which was finalizing a BTA, or a bilateral trade agreement. Post the meet, both sides have said they welcome the significant progress in the negotiations for a mutually beneficial India-US bilateral trade agreement. And certainly, progress seems to have been made. According to US trade representatives, both countries have finalized the terms of reference for the Multi-Sector Trade Pact, a framework that outlines increasing market access, reducing tariffs, and negotiating new commitments. The US also said that it welcomed India's willingness to further reduce tariffs on the US products as part of the BTA. But the message from Washington is clear. US Trade Representative Ambassador Greer said, and I quote, that there is a serious lack of reciprocity in the trade relationship with India, talking about the $45.7 billion trade deficit that exists between the two nations. For the USA, they are seeking deeper market access, especially in sensitive sectors like agriculture, e-commerce, and dairy, and lowering duties on American products. Meanwhile, New Delhi is pushing for tariff exemptions and concessions that can help it battle the Trump storm. Remember, both sides have agreed to seal a bilateral trade deal during Prime Minister Modi's visit to Washington early this year. The deal aims to increase bilateral trade to $500 billion by 2030, and the deadline to finalize the deal has been set for fall of 2025. In fact, it's not just the US Vice President's visit. There have been a flurry of high-profile visits both to and from Delhi and Washington as both sides rush to ink a deal. The urgency to finalize this deal have further been heightened due to President Donald Trump's sweeping tariff regime, which is currently on a 90-day pause that ends fairly soon. India had to face the brunt of a 27% tariff, even as the Indian economy remains relatively resilient, as exports from only 2% of GDP, but still pain points remain. But beyond the numbers, the stakes are high. The hope is that the ongoing negotiations for the trade deal could help India score some concessions. A successful trade pact would mark India's biggest economic engagement with the West in decades. For the US, it's about creating a trusted partner in a region where China's shadow looms large. For India, it's about attracting manufacturing, boosting exports, and showing the world that it can be a reliable pillar of the global economy. At the same time, India is not the only country in talks with the US. Tariff and trade-related talks are on with several other countries as well. None have reached a formal conclusion. So the question we're asking today, can India crack a trade deal with the US way ahead of everyone else? And how crucial would it be? To speak on this, I'm joined today by Janmajay Sinha, Chairman of the BCG India Group, Ashok Sajjanhar, President, Institute of Global Studies and a former diplomat, Dr. Pralok Gupta, International Trade Expert and Associate Professor at the Center for WTO Studies, IIFT, also with us on the show. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with me on The Big Question. Mr. Sinha, let me begin with your take on how crucial the J.D. Vance visit is. And one way of looking at it, perhaps, is that he's not just like every other American vice president. This vice president seems to have quite a say.
Well, Tamanna, the way I look at it is that all these actions in the next 90 days, I'm sure India will get a deal. I don't know that a deal will be there tomorrow or the deal will happen first. And it need not. There is a pause right now, so nothing has changed. But over the next 90 days, I am sure India will get some kind of a deal. There is no doubt in my mind. The issue is, the US also right now has got a shock that, if you see, China has been a shock to them.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Okay. And I feel that in that context, they are also wanting a deal with a large country. They did not anticipate that China would not come to the negotiating table and would make no overtures towards them. So there is a bit of a shock. The other thing is a zero tariff deal with the US, in many ways is not troublesome for India. What are the imports that we are getting? And there are some imports in sensitive area, but not material. Agriculture is 14% of India's GDP in value terms, but it is a sensitive area. And dairy, the feedstock of American dairy has meat and stuff in it. So there are some complications in that. But otherwise, if you really look at it, to get a trade deal with the US is not a problem. India's problem right now is not the US, it is China. Because China will have this oversupply which it will have to place. And that's what is going to be a matter of great concern. We have to look at the second order conditions of tariffs, which is global economic slowdown.
Yeah.
If you look at the US, if you look at EU, you look at China, they will all tend to slow down. When the whole global economy slows down, it has an impact on us too. So that will be an issue. If you look at some of the macro the dynamics, the dollar will weaken. What does that do? When do trade flows start coming back again? Those are questions. Oil prices should come down, which will be beneficial for India. But overall, I think India right now is not the worst hit country in the world. Of course, there is uncertainty. So businesses don't know how to plan with so much uncertainty. That is a real issue. But if I just look overall at the trade deal, firstly, I am hopeful that we will get one. The issues for us is more on the services side than on the goods side, and we'll have to see how they, if we go down that path. And there will be some advantages for India because, to have cutting down tariffs makes us more efficient also. So in some senses, of course, now it's all becoming bilateral, which has its own complications, but we will also be needing trade deals with other countries. So the more efficient we become in terms of our tariff levels, that will not hurt us. I must say that I personally have been uneasy with the slow drift of tariffs going up in India.
So, everyone has talked about India cutting tariffs as a necessary situation. Perhaps if it's being forced on us, not ideal, but something we needed to have done. I think the other aspect of this is also very important, and I want to come to Ashok Sajjanhar on this, about how the United States or Washington right now is defining non-tariff barriers. And there seems to be a fairly wide sweeping set of definitions, including things like subsidies India gives her farmers, or bureaucracy or red tapeism, I believe is also in their document. How do you negotiate on non-tangibles like that when there's a conversation?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tamanna. Yes, that is definitely a challenge because, as far as the non-tariff barriers are concerned, some of them, they are identified as far as the WTO is concerned. You mentioned about subsidies, so, you have countervail duties. If there is dumping, you can have anti-dumping. So, there are specific yardsticks by which you apply, as far as dumping is concerned. If there is the sale in a foreign market is at a price that is lower than the normal price in the domestic market, then you take it as as dumping. Or if there is predatory attempt to control a market, in which you can also place safeguard measures. So those aspects, those are very well defined in international trading, literature and negotiations. But the sort of elements that you have mentioned just now, in terms of the non-tariff barriers, I think that will be very difficult. I'm sure if the United States wants to bring those into consideration, I'm sure they have an equal number of similar non-tariff barriers. And, our team should also basically be able to, put this also on the negotiating table and say that, there is we need to speak about both of these things. But if you permit, I will, the what you were talking about, getting a trade deal. I am not so confident because, basically, as far as JD Vance's visit is concerned, that is to give a political message in terms of the commitment of both sides in taking these discussions and negotiations forward. But the real work has to be done, the nitty gritty, the technical details have to be done by the teams, led by the ministers. So we
Yes.
had our commerce industry minister who went there, and there were discussions. There was a team that came from the United States at the end of March. Now, as you said very correctly, the terms of reference have been decided. Right now, we have also, a high-level visit of our Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman to the United States, and also a Commerce Ministry-led team there. So that is going to be at at the discussion level. I think what JD Vance's visit does is gives out a political message. Basically what was decided on 13th February when Prime Minister Modi went to Washington, D.C., was that there would be the first tranche of a BTA. And the BTA, let us not confuse it with an FTA. It is not an FTA. It is a limited agreement on certain sectors and certain products. So that is where we can come to a deal. I'm not sure we can do it on during this 90-day pause, because we have time till about September, October, to come up with a first tranche of this.
You're right, sir. You're right, sir. The reason that we're speaking about the bilateral trade agreement and this 90-day pause in one breath is because the ideal situation is you tie up the bilateral trade agreement before you end the pause. So, you sort of bypass whatever comes after this 90-day period ends, and which is why it becomes so important. Having said that,
I agree with you. You're right. I think that is the point I would like to make is we should try to make as much progress as possible. Knowing Mr. Trump, the manner in which he has behaved, I think there will be this attempt to keep on pushing the envelope and demanding more as we go along. So I think we can definitely try to tie up this, as far as the different loose threads of the agreement are concerned, trying to tie them up. But to finalize the whole BTA, not only the first tranche of the BTA, I think that could prove to be challenging. But last point here, Tamanna, if you permit, which is that India has a lead over all other countries. We were proactive in terms of preemptively reaching out to the United States. You see what we did in our budget on the 1st of February, what commitments that were made even when the Prime Minister met Donald Trump as far as the tariffs on bourbon whiskey are concerned, also the discussions that we are having. So we have definitely an edge over other countries in terms of moving forward. And I do sincerely hope that we'll be able to, make significant progress in terms of tying up number of sectors and number of specific products on which there is agreement between the two sides.
Dr. Gupta, what's at stake here? Give us a sense of what's at stake here and how crucial it is. And, I'll give you an example on how this is being looked at. In equity markets, you suddenly have a huge movement in groups of stocks in the hope that there will be a trade agreement which works out better for India vis-a-vis the others. Textile companies, just for example, and you're seeing that in the equity markets today as one set of companies, or whether you have those who export seafood or some such. What are the stakes as far as India is concerned, and why does this become crucial in a relative state?
No, Tamanna, this is definitely very crucial for not only Indian stock markets, but also global stock markets, including US. And if you see the behavior of US stock markets, particularly the bond market, this time they behaved slightly different as compared to earlier panic situations in the stock market. Earlier, whenever there is a panic situation in stock market, the investors tend to invest in the US bond because they consider that these bonds are safest security and they get a relatively good return. But this time it does not happen. Of course, it happened on April 2nd, but April 5th onwards, the investors are not very prone to invest in the US bonds. And as a result, the yield on US bonds increased from 3.9% to 4.5%. And the significant reason is because China is the second largest owner of US bonds. Now, if that is the case, that yield on US bonds is increasing, it will increase the cost of borrowing for other interest for other securities like home loans or loans to the small and medium companies, and that will have a repercussion or a trickle down effect on industry in the US, and that will have further impact on the US also, because on India also, because ultimately we are having US is one of our largest trading partner. So anything happening in US will affect our companies, and that's why the stock market is also behaving in a panic way. So there are sentiments that sometimes the entire movement is not driven by exactly the news, but rather the sentiments. But having said that, if you see that over a slightly 2-3 months ahead, there would be uncertainty, and this kind of information or the setbacks of Sensex coming down and slightly going, that will continue, because a lot of will depend upon how China is reacting.
No, so
And
one minute, let me make my question very clear. It's not, I mean, I was talking about equity markets as a reference, Dr. Gupta. What I'm trying to understand is that what is the extent of opportunity that really exists for India? Are we jumping the gun?
this is realistic, because as Mr. Ashok was also mentioning, that we are way ahead from other countries. We have already our Prime Minister spoken about the BTA during February, then the TOR has been finalized, and if you see the other countries like Korea, they are visiting next week to discuss the trade deal. Japan was there last week, but still there are a lot of concern because they already have a deal with US in 2019, and they decided not to have tariff on auto, but US imposed tariff on auto. So considering the situation in other markets, we are very well placed to clinch this deal. There are challenges in terms of the sensitive sectors like agriculture sector, automobile sector, but still considering that this deal is of interest to both the countries. US has also softened its stand significantly, because there are a large number of protests there. Their economy is also having negative sentiments.
Yeah.
So that way,
I think what's interesting is that for the US also they need a win, right? And
Yes.
we have Dr. Janmejay Sinha back with us. They need to show a win. The Trump administration needs to show that I cracked a deal. And since he's talked about India incessantly, even though we're not the largest trading partner, in pretty much every speech as an example of a country with high tariffs, if they go back and get to say that, yes, we cracked a great deal with India, it helps him. How does it help us? How do we utilize this requirement to our benefit, Dr. Sinha?
See, to be very honest with you, what is our worry with US? What do you think we will start importing from the US? Do you think we'll be importing US cars, Harley Davidson motorcycles? Let's be realistic. That is not our worry. Even in agriculture, how much do you think we will be importing? The imports from the US don't concern us that much, to be very honest with you. What does concern us is that the $1.2 trillion deficit that the US has, of which 475 billion is with China, where is China going to place some of the exports it was doing to the US? To give you a basic context, China is 38% of global manufacturing, 18% of global GDP, and 13% of global consumption. So the US establishment says there is a 5% implicit subsidy which the Chinese consumer gives manufacturing in China. But I don't think Xi Jinping bothers. Every economist will tell you that China should increase internal consumption. Do you think Xi Jinping is going to for that? No. He wants the world to be dependent on him and he wants to be Atmanirbhar. So his strategy is to increase manufacturing, reduce consumption a little bit more. He feels the Chinese are hardy enough and they'll be able to bear it. The counter to the US is quite tough. Now, for us, what is the opportunity? The opportunity is the spaces that Vietnam and China were occupying. Can we go and fill some of those with our own exports? Can we be alert to that and increase that? And the basic thing is, how do we watch against what happens to us from China? That's what we have to go through in a very serious manner. How do we save ourselves, from the avalanche of goods that may be coming to us through different routes? And we'll have to be thoughtful about that. Now, of course, he needs the win. He will take the win and he'll say, my friend Modi and I have done this and all that. That's great. It's so helpful for us.
Yeah.
But it doesn't solve our problem. And as regards non-tariff barriers, the non-tariff barriers that the US, as Mr. Sajjanhar was saying, the US imposes massive non-tariff barriers. Credit rating agencies are a non-tariff barrier.
Yes.
The Department of Justice is a non-tariff barrier. The use of the dollar is a non-tariff barrier. So we face a lot of non-tariff barriers. We would be happy to increase our imports of US defense, but they don't give it to us totally. They don't give us the latest. They hold back on things. If they can give us more, we'd be happy to buy more defense from the US. But the situation today in the world is one of extreme uncertainty. And there will no doubt be a global slowdown. I do not doubt it, that there will be a global slowdown. If you really look at the world, this slowdown will, of course, reduce oil prices, which help us a lot, because the overall demand for oil will be less. And this flip in the US dollar is now, if you really look at it, in 250 years, US accumulated $17 trillion of debt. In the last 10 years, it added another $17 trillion of debt. So the US is very sensitive to bond markets. If bond yields start going up, that will really start causing tension. And if hedge funds then all have to unwind their positions, they'll start failing. I don't think that the US government can deal with that.
Yeah,
That is a very sensitive
we're
area.
seeing some of that already happening, even after those comments about Jerome Powell, the latest set that has come in. But
You're exactly right. You're exactly right.
Even the fear of that has seen bond yields rising sharply and the dollar, tumbling. But I just want us to look at the relative sort of smoke signs that we're seeing, which are definitely, I would say, positive. And Mr. Sajjanhar, let me come to you on that. For example, a news report today saying that Google wants to start producing Pixel. They're shifting some of the production of the Pixel phone from Vietnam into India. And that is now one area where we have already built capability. So we're ready and waiting, for example, to scale up on those kind of devices. Maybe in other areas we need to. How do we make the most of this opportunity? Because all things considered, we are in a relative sweet spot, aren't we?
Yeah, you're very right. I would tend to agree that, we are in a sweet spot at the moment. And that is because, if you look at even the relatives, meaning why does Google want to come here? Why would other companies want to come here? That is basically because, they don't want to invest in China because China being under currently 245%, we don't know what is going to be the final rate of tariffs that is going to be imposed on China. But for all practical purposes, the huge US market, where it was sending about $500 billion plus worth of goods, that has been denied to it. So, that is a huge vacuum that has been created. And I think it is an opportunity for India to take. Unfortunately, we were not, we did take that opportunity during the COVID period, although, during the COVID time also, there were Mr. Trump in his first term had imposed tariffs on steel, aluminum, taken away our GSP preferences, etc., etc. But still, we were able to get some advantage in the US market as a result of the, tariffs that were imposed on China. but we were not able to take advantage of the China plus one investment strategies of different countries. And that is basically, I think we need to do more of the homework. I think, as the other panelists have also said, there is, of course, urgent need for trade policy reform in India to make ourselves more competitive. And we need to be more competitive. So I think this is the crying need of the hour, to use this challenge as an opportunity and to bring our tariffs down, make ourselves more competitive,
Yep.
become a part of the global value chain, global supply chains, etc. So that is one in terms of getting more investment. What you mentioned, Tamanna, in terms of getting Googles and the others coming in. The other aspect is, as I said, the Chinese exports going to the United States, that comes down very significantly. Also, many, even after this 90-day pause, all these countries, whether it is Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Bangladesh, etc., their tariffs are much higher than what the tariffs on India are. So, even if you take that as the base level, India still has a differential advantage over these particular countries. But we need to do, we need to work not only on the trade deal with the United States, of course, that is the issue we are discussing, but also with the EU, with the UK, because
Of course,
I think
and
those are
also
all
right now,
opportunities.
everyone wants to talk to us. The Chinese want to talk to us, and we should talk to everyone. Why not?
Yes.
We should talk to the Europeans. We should talk to everyone who wants to do business, because we're willing to talk, and maybe we're the ones who want to crack the best deals at the end of it.
Tamanna, will you give me half a minute to make one more point,
Yes,
which
sir.
is, on agriculture? And what I would like to say is, the United States is an efficient producer of agricultural goods. So also is Australia. Now, we have been able to sign a deal. You remember that there were problems with Australia also on agriculture and dairy products. We've been able to do that as far as Australia is concerned. I know that there is, the provisions of tariffs, quotas, etc., that we have entered into with Australia. Maybe something similar on areas of interest to the United States, like cashew, like pistachio, like this alfalfa hay. I think, which might be of sensitivity and concern for us, whether we can do something on those lines that we have done with Australia. Thank you.
Absolutely. So a lot of opportunity there. We'll watch this space very closely as it's unfolding. And, which is why perhaps you're seeing the upbeat mood in equity markets. I'm not saying equity markets have all the answers, but sometimes they're a reflection of common thinking at any one point. And this is what they're reflecting, that maybe we'll be able to crack the right deal well in time and come out of this better place than others. We'll hope for that. Thank you so much to all of you. I've absolutely run out of time, but thank you so much for joining us on the show, and to our viewers as well. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be back, same place, same time tomorrow.